I fell in my own bathroom on a Wednesday morning in February. One second I was stepping out of the shower, the next the bath mat slid and I was down, my right wrist taking the impact, then my shoulder hitting the edge of the vanity on the way. I heard the crack before I felt it. Then I felt it. I lay on the cold tile for what I later found out was nearly 50 minutes. The window above the toilet was frosted. February in Sudbury, Ontario does that to windows, and the heat hadn't come up yet for the morning. My housecoat was on the hook by the door. I couldn't reach it. I called out twice before I remembered that my daughter and her husband had flown to Vancouver 4 days ago for what she described as a work thing, nothing major. My phone was on the nightstand in the bedroom, 6 feet and a world away. It was my mail carrier, Bet, who saved me. She'd been delivering to my street for 11 years, and she knew that my porch light stays off during the day and on at night, always. Wednesday morning, she noticed it was still on at 10:30. She knocked. When nobody answered, she called the non-emergency line. The paramedics found me on the bathroom floor in my wet housecoat, shaking more from cold than pain, though there was plenty of pain. At the hospital, they told me I'd fractured my wrist in 2 places and partially torn a ligament in my shoulder. I would need a cast and surgery to properly set the wrist. The intake nurse asked who to call. I gave her my daughter's number. Before they wheeled me into pre-op, the nurse came back with a careful face. "We've tried several times. We'll keep trying." I knew what that face meant. I'd worn it myself for 31 years as a registered nurse at Health Sciences North. It was the face you wore when you had no good news to deliver. I went into surgery without my daughter knowing I was there. What I didn't know until later was that while I was being anesthetized, she was posting a photo to her social media. The two of them at Granville Island Market, coffees in hand, laughing at something off camera. The caption read, "Finally breathing again. No schedules, no obligations. Just present." That post had gone up at 11:14 a.m. My surgery started at 11:40. Before I go further, if stories about family, loyalty, and finding your footing again mean something to you, please take a moment to subscribe to Gemstone Revenge. Drop your city in the comments. I always love knowing who's listening. And I want to be clear, some of the identifying details in this story have been changed to protect privacy. But everything that matters, the choices that were made, the things that were said, the people who showed up, and the ones who didn't, all of that is real. My name is not important. What is important is that I am 67 years old. I spent over 3 decades caring for other people's mothers and fathers and children in a hospital, and I am not naive. I know what neglect looks like. I have filed the paperwork for it. I just never thought I would be the one lying on the floor waiting to find out if my own child would answer the phone. My husband passed away 4 years ago. Heart attack, sudden, no warning. We've been married 41 years. We had a house on Lorne Street in Sudbury that we've lived in since 1989, the year our daughter was 3 years old. After he died, I stayed in the house because I couldn't imagine leaving the place where he'd still felt close. His reading glasses were on the table by his chair for 8 months before I could move them. I kept the bird feeders filled the way he always had. I walked the same loop through Bell Park every morning because we used to walk it together. I was not a woman who fell apart. I went back to work. I kept up with the neighbors. I started a book club that met every second Thursday at the library branch on Mackenzie. I was managing. Not happily, not fully, but managing. My daughter lives in Mississauga with her husband. They have a good income, a large house, no children. She works in corporate communications. Her husband? I'll call him my son-in-law because that's all he is to me now. Works in real estate development. They visit once or twice a year, which became once a year, which became Christmas, which became last Christmas a phone call because they were going to her in-laws' place in Collingwood, and it was just easier. Easier. I told myself the usual things. She's busy. They have their lives. This is what adult children do. I had friends whose kids lived across the country who saw them less than I saw mine. I tried not to feel like a burden. I tried not to call too often. I monitored myself. How many times had I called this week? Had I waited long enough before calling again? I kept a kind of internal tally that I'm ashamed of now, ashamed that I let myself become so careful about needing things. 8 months before my fall, my son-in-law called me out of the blue. I remember being surprised because he never called. Not once in 14 years of marriage had he called me on his own. Just checking in, he said, which I should have known right then was a lie because it had never been something he did. He was warm in that particular way of people who want something, asking about the neighborhood, whether I found the house hard to maintain now that I was on my own, whether I'd thought about what I wanted to do long term. He mentioned that property values in my area had gone up considerably. He mentioned twice that a house like mine, detached on a quiet street close to the lake, was a real asset. I told him I wasn't thinking about selling. Of course not, of course, he said, and moved on. But a seed had been planted, and the ground was more prepared than I knew. 6 weeks before I fell, my daughter called my friend Odette, who has lived across the street from me for 22 years. I didn't know about this call until later. Odette told me she'd found it strange at the time, my daughter asking whether she'd noticed me being forgetful, whether I seemed confused on my walks, whether I'd had any close calls. She said she was worried about you living alone, Odette told me. She kept using the phrase cognitive indicators. I didn't know what that meant, but it felt clinical. Odette had told her I was the sharpest person on the street and the one most likely to notice if anyone else was struggling. My daughter thanked her, sounded disappointed, and hung up. A week after that, the same call went to my old colleague Pierrette, who had worked alongside me for 15 years at HSN. Pierrette called to ask me what was going on, which is how I know about that one. She asked me if I thought you were still competent to live alone, Pierrette said, her voice tight. I told her you'd run circles around half the staff on our unit. She asked if I thought you might need some support arranging your affairs. I told her your affairs looked arranged just fine. 2 calls, 2 friends, same questions, same language, same thinly veiled message. Something is wrong with her. We're building a file. I didn't connect the dots until I was in the hospital. When I came out of surgery, there was a woman asleep in the chair beside my bed. Her name is Magali, and she is 34 years old, the daughter of my friend Colette, who passed away 3 years ago. I had met Magali when she was 8, brought soup to their house when Colette was sick, attended her mother's funeral, kept in touch with her because it seemed like the thing you do when someone loses a parent young. I'd gone to her nursing school graduation. We had dinner a few times a year. She texted me on my birthday, remembered to ask about the bird feeders. She had driven up from Ottawa the night before, 5.5 hours, because Bet the mail carrier had found my emergency contact sheet in my kitchen when the paramedics came in, and Magali was on it. Her hair was flat on one side from sleeping in the hospital chair. She woke up the moment I shifted and was immediately awake and present in the way that certain people are, people who have sat in hospital rooms before and know how to read them. "You're okay," she said. "Surgery went well. They said the wrist will take time, but you'll have full function." She poured water from the pitcher on the tray and held the cup steady while I drank. "My daughter?" I managed. Magali paused. Then she said, "The hospital's been calling." I tried her number too. "She's in Vancouver." Magali looked at me carefully. "She has service," she said. "Her phone is working." She didn't show me the posts right then. She told me later that she'd seen them while she was driving up, stopped at a gas station in Parry Sound, scrolling her phone, and had found my daughter's social media account, which was public because my daughter considered herself someone worth following. The Vancouver posts were there: the market, a waterfront restaurant, a spa afternoon captioned, "Investing in myself," a sunset from what looked like a hotel balcony, my daughter and son-in-law both laughing, both photographed, both clearly holding phones. 43 hours, 6 posts. Every one of them time-stamped during the window the hospital had been calling. Magali waited until the second day to show me, when I was clearer, less groggy, better able to hold the information without it tilting the room. She set her phone in my left hand, my uninjured hand, and let me scroll. No obligations, just present. I read it 3 times. Then I set the phone down on the bed cover and looked at the ceiling. I was the obligation. My daughter wasn't ignoring a crisis. She was, in her mind, on a vacation she deserved from the weight of having a mother who existed and occasionally needed things. No obligations meant she had calculated me in as one and left me on the other side of the door. I closed my eyes. What came, the way things do when you're tired and your defenses are low, were all the moments I had managed to explain away over 4 years. The funeral, where she'd stayed 5 days, long enough to help with the immediate arrangements, and then gone back to Mississauga because she had a client presentation. I had sorted through 41 years of a shared life alone, gone through your father's clothes alone, filled out the estate paperwork alone. I called her crying once in the first week, and she told me to try to get out of the house, that staying busy would help. She meant well. I chose to believe she meant well. The Christmas she came but left before we'd finished dinner. The birthday she forgot and texted 3 days late. The time I had a minor procedure on my knee, routine. I downplayed it, but I mentioned it and she said, "Let me know if you need anything," and didn't call to find out how it went. The year I suggested she might want my mother's China service before I donated it, and she said, "We don't really have space, Mom." I had made so many excuses. I am a person who makes excuses for the people I love. I'm a nurse. I understand that behavior comes from somewhere, that people are complicated, that love doesn't always look the way you need it to. I was so committed to that understanding that I let it hollow me out. On the 3rd day, Audette drove down from Sudbury to bring me soup and to tell me about the phone call. On the 4th day, Pierrette came on her day off with a stack of magazines and told me about hers. And that was when it clicked. Macaulay had picked up my mail while she was at my house getting clothes. She handed me an envelope on the 4th day, thick, with a return address I recognized as one of those assisted living and memory care facilities out near the Kingsway. Inside was a brochure, smiling residents in bright dining rooms, activities calendars, a pastoral view from what the brochure called a serenity garden. Tucked inside the brochure was a partially completed inquiry form, resident name, my name, age. Reason for inquiry: cognitive decline, difficulty managing independently, safety concerns, family-initiated placement. Every box that could be marked was marked. The contact information at the bottom, name and phone number, and handwritten notes in the margin. My son-in-law's handwriting. I recognized it from birthday cards in the early years, before those stopped too. The postmark on the envelope was dated 9 days before I fell. Magali watched me read it. She didn't say anything, just waited, because she's a person who understands that some information needs a moment to land before you can respond to it. "He went to my house," I said finally. "He went through my things. Or she ordered it online and had it sent. Either way." Magali's voice was quiet. They'd been planning this for a while. The shape of it assembled itself clearly then, the way a diagnosis does when you finally have all the symptoms in front of you. The call about property values. The calls to Audette and Pierrette, building a paper trail of a woman in decline. The inquiry form sent before any fall, before any actual crisis. This wasn't a response to my situation. It was a plan that had been waiting for my situation. When I fell, they didn't see an emergency. They saw the plan moving forward on its own. A woman in hospital with a fracture, elderly, lives alone, history of a fall. That's a case. That's paperwork that writes itself. No need to cut the trip short. The medical records would do the work while they posted sunsets. I was in the hospital for 7 days total. I will not pretend they were easy days. There were moments, especially at night when the ward was quiet, when I felt the full weight of what it means to be a person lying in a hospital bed who has realized with terrible clarity that her daughter is not coming. Those nights were their own kind of grief. But I also had Magali sleeping in a chair and then in the family room down the hall. I had Audette and Pierrette. I had Beth the mail carrier, who sent a card signed by what seemed like half my street. I had the nurses on the surgical floor who recognized in me a former colleague and showed that kinship in small professional ways that meant more than they knew. I called my lawyer from the hospital. Her name is Sandra, and she had handled my husband's estate. I told her I needed to make changes to my will, and I needed them documented properly and quickly. She came to the hospital herself, which is not something lawyers are required to do and which I have not forgotten. We went through everything methodically. The house, the savings accounts, the RRSP that had been rolled into a RIF after my husband passed, the pension. Sandra helped me structure it cleanly. My daughter would receive a specific and limited amount, clearly documented and explained in an accompanying letter. The remainder went to Magali, to the breast cancer charity in Colette's name, to the palliative care unit at HSN, where my husband had spent his last 2 days, and to the nursing bursary fund at Laurentian, which I had been contributing to for years. You'll want documentation of cognitive fitness, Sandra said. If they can test, and people in their position often do, you need a clear record. The occupational therapist on my floor, who had been assessing my hand function post-surgery, arranged for the cognitive assessment. I found it almost insulting how quickly and thoroughly I passed it. The assessor said I tested significantly above average for my age group. Sandra attached the results to the will. 11 days after my surgery, my daughter called. Her voice came at me in a wave of warmth and explanations. They'd had no idea. The service in Vancouver was so unreliable. She'd only just seen all the messages piling up. She was horrified, absolutely horrified, and she was booking a flight right now. She would be there Saturday. I listened. I let her finish. You posted 6 times, I said. Between Thursday and Saturday, 6 posts, each with location tags, each with comments you responded to. Your phone was working fine. A pause. Mom, you also had the inquiry form sent to my house. From the Kingsway facility, your husband filled it out. Silence. I didn't ask her to explain. I didn't need an explanation. I had already done the work of understanding what it meant. She came on Saturday. My son-in-law came too. They came to my house, which Magali had been looking after, and they sat in my living room in the careful way of people who know they've been caught and are trying to calculate the damage. My son-in-law complimented the house twice. He looked at the windows, which are original and drafty, and the kind of thing a developer notices. I let them sit with the quiet for a moment. Then I told them about Sandra. I told them I had updated my estate documents following my hospitalization, which was, I said, a reasonable thing for a woman in her late 60s to do after a health event. I told them Sandra wanted to go over the finalized documents and had suggested a meeting. They agreed quickly. Too quickly. My daughter reached for my hand and held it, and she hadn't held my hand in years, and I understood then exactly what the gesture was. We met in Sandra's office the following Wednesday. A boardroom on Elm Street, downtown Sudbury, 2nd floor. Magali came with me. When my daughter and son-in-law walked in and saw Magali sitting across the table, my daughter's expression flickered. Her husband's jaw tightened. "Why is she here?" he said. "Because I asked her to be," I said. "She's been with me since the first night in the hospital. She's earned a seat at this table." I looked at my daughter. "You haven't sat in a hospital chair for me in 11 days, so please don't start telling me who belongs in a room." They sat. Sandra walked through the documents efficiently and professionally. She reached the bequests, the limited amount to my daughter, clearly framed as a proportional gesture of acknowledgement, the attached letter of explanation, then the rest. The charitable allocations, Magali's name, with an amount that made Magali look at her hands for a moment, composing herself. My son-in-law said, "This isn't what we discussed." I said, "You and I have never discussed my estate. You asked me about property values 8 months ago. That's the closest we've come." He started to say something else. My daughter put her hand on his arm, not to comfort him, to stop him. She knew, I think, that we were past the point where talking helped. Sandra said, "I want to note for the record that my client completed a full cognitive assessment 9 days ago, administered by a certified occupational therapist, and scored in the top percentile for her age cohort. A signed copy is attached to this document. Any challenge to the validity of this will, on the basis of competency, would face that documentation as its first obstacle." My son-in-law looked at the table. My daughter looked at me. I looked back at her for a long time. I was looking for the girl I had raised, the one who drew pictures at the kitchen table while I made dinner, who had sobbed into my shoulder the night before her first day of high school, who had called me from her first apartment in a panic because she didn't know how to unclog a drain. She was in there somewhere, I have no doubt of that. But she had let him lead her somewhere she should have refused to go, and I didn't know anymore if the path back was one she was willing to walk. I needed you, I said. My voice was steady. I'd had 11 days to make peace with what I was going to say. I was on a bathroom floor for 50 minutes. I was in surgery. I was in a hospital bed for 7 days. The person who came was Magali, who drove 5.5 hours in the dark and slept in an uncomfortable chair for 4 nights. The person who got me out of that bathroom was my mail carrier. The person who brought soup was my neighbor. I paused. You were posting that you had no obligations. My daughter's eyes were wet. My son-in-law was staring at the surface of the table. I'm not angry, I said, and I meant it. The anger had burned through during those long hospital nights and left something cooler and clearer behind. I'm just done making excuses. I'm done convincing myself that what I see isn't what it is. They left. Sandra walked them out. Magali sat with me in the boardroom for a while afterward, the afternoon light coming through the blinds in long, pale strips across the table, neither of us saying much. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. I had braced myself for legal threats, for confrontation, for my son-in-law doing what people in his position do when they've been outmaneuvered. Sandra had braced for it too. It didn't come, or at least it hasn't come yet, and Sandra's letter outlining the cognitive documentation may have been persuasive in ways I'll never fully know. My daughter called once, 3 weeks later in the evening. We talked for a while. It was not a reconciliation. It was 2 people who love each other trying to figure out if there's a shared language left. I don't know yet if there is. I am not closing the door. But I'm not standing in the hallway waiting anymore either. My wrist healed slower than I wanted and faster than the surgeon expected. By April, I was driving again. I went back to the book club. I started taking a watercolor class at the art center on Elgin, something I'd always thought I wasn't the type for, and something I am, as it turns out, enthusiastically mediocre at. My instructor, a retired teacher named Don, says I have a good eye for composition and a stubborn relationship with detail, which I think is the most accurate thing anyone has said about me in years. Magali comes to Sudbury once a month. We have dinner. We walk. She checks the bird feeders because she knows they matter, and she remembers why. I have been to Ottawa twice since February, once to help her when she moved to a bigger apartment, once just because I wanted to. Last month, I booked a trip. 7 nights in Victoria, British Columbia. The Butchart Gardens, which my husband always said we'd get to eventually. A whale-watching tour I found online at midnight on a Tuesday, which felt reckless and right. I've never traveled alone, not once in 67 years. The ticket is on the counter by my keys, where I see it every morning. Some days I pick it up and feel afraid. Some days I pick it up and feel like myself again. Most days it's both at once. People ask me if I regret the will. A few people who know me, have said gently that cutting family off is something I might feel differently about in time. I hear them. I understand the impulse behind it, but I want to be precise about what I actually did. I didn't cut my daughter off. I stopped rewarding a pattern of absence. I stopped arranging my estate around people who had arranged me out of their lives. I put my resources toward the people and places that had shown up, literally and otherwise. That isn't bitterness. That's bookkeeping. What I do grieve, what I think I'll grieve for a long time, is the version of my daughter I carried in my mind. The one who would come. The one who would come. The one who, when it was serious, would put down the coffee on Granville Island and get on a plane. I don't know if that daughter ever fully existed outside my imagination, but I loved her, and losing her, even when the real version of her is still alive and sending occasional texts, and might yet surprise me, losing the imagined one is its own particular kind of mourning. A pastor I know, a woman named Edith, who leads the Tuesday evening group I've started attending at the church on Notre Dame, said something I've been carrying around. She said that the people we keep defending in our own minds are sometimes not the people who actually exist, but the people we needed them to be. And at some point, she said, you have to grieve the need alongside the person. I thought about that for a long time afterward. She's right. I needed my daughter to be someone who would come. I arranged my understanding of our relationship around that need. And when it turned out she wasn't, I had to grieve both. The daughter I'd imagined and the need I'd had that made that imagining so necessary. That grief is real. It doesn't make the will wrong. Here is what I know at 67, with a healed wrist and a watercolor class and a plane ticket to Victoria on my counter. Family is not the people who share your last name or your holiday table. Family is Magali driving through the night to sit beside a hospital bed because my name was still in her mother's address book and she didn't hesitate when she saw it. Family is Audette crossing the street with soup. Family is Bet the mail carrier who noticed a porch light and acted on it, who probably saved my life without knowing she was doing anything extraordinary. I spent 31 years as a nurse. I know what it means to show up for people at their worst and most vulnerable. It is not complicated. You go, you sit. You stay until it's done. Some people are built for it and some people aren't, and there's no amount of love or history or shared blood that changes that capacity in a person. I've stopped waiting to find out which kind my daughter is. I am choosing instead to surround myself with people I already know the answer about. It's not too late for that. It wasn't too late for me at 67 on a bathroom floor in February. It's not too late for you, wherever you are, however long you've been waiting for someone who isn't coming. The bird feeders are full. Victoria is in 6 weeks. On Sunday, Magali is coming for dinner. I'm looking forward to all 3. If this story stayed with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to redefine what family means to you? Has someone unexpected shown up when it mattered? Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you'd like to follow along, please subscribe to Gemstone Revenge. There are more stories here about the people who stay, the decisions that change everything, and what it looks like to start over when you thought you were too far in to begin again. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately. Not in any grand philosophical way, just in the plain practical way that comes from lying on a cold bathroom floor for 50 minutes and having too much time to think. The people who showed up for me didn't appear from nowhere. Magali came because I had stayed late at the hospital when her mother was sick. I hadn't done it expecting anything in return. You never do, not really. But the care I gave then came back to me in a hospital chair at 2 in the morning. 30 years later, Audette crossed the street with soup because we had been neighbors who actually looked at each other for 22 years. That noticed my porch light because she had been paying attention to me for 11 years of mail deliveries. None of that was accidental. It was accumulated. It was the result of small, consistent choices that I made, and that they made over a very long time. And then there's the other side of it. My daughter and her husband didn't arrive at that inquiry form in a single moment of cruelty. They arrived there through years of smaller choices. The Christmas they left before dessert, the birthday they forgot, the procedure they didn't ask about, the phone call where she told me to stay busy instead of staying present. Each one of those choices was a small withdrawal from something, and eventually the account was empty in a way that neither of us had formally acknowledged. The inquiry form was just the moment I stopped being able to pretend otherwise. What I've come to believe is that character isn't what you declare. It's what you do when the situation is inconvenient. When the call comes from a hospital in Sudbury and you're standing in a market in Vancouver with a coffee in your hand, when your mother needs you and saying yes would cost you something, that's the moment that tells you who a person actually is. Not the birthday card, not the Christmas visit. The moment it costs something. I'm not proud of how long it took me to see clearly. I spent years defending a version of my daughter that I needed to believe in. That's not her failing. It's mine, or at least it's mine to own. I was a nurse for 31 years. I know that you cannot help someone by pretending they're not doing what they're doing. You name the symptom, you make the diagnosis, you figure out the treatment. I failed to apply that same clarity to my own life for far longer than I should have. What I know now is this: resilience is not toughness. It's not refusing to feel things or pushing through without complaint. It's being willing to look at what's true, even when what's true is painful, and then making the next decision from that honest place instead of from the comfortable lie. I made my decisions. The will, the lawyer, the conversation in Sandra's office, from the most honest place I'd been in years. That's what made them feel clean, even when they hurt. I'm 67. I have a watercolor class I'm mediocre at and a plane ticket to Victoria and dinner with Magali on Sunday. I have a mail carrier who noticed a porch light and a neighbor who crosses the street with soup. I have, it turns out, exactly the life I built, and I built more of it than I knew.